Hello again, 102. In this video, we will go over in part 1 some of the effects of the Second World War on American society. And this will also be a two-part video series on this question. The War Powers Act gave the president far-reaching authority to reorganize government agencies and create new ones, regulate business and industry, and even censor mail and other forms of communication. With the declaration of war, men between the ages of 18 and 45 were drafted, and this had been going on already, as we saw in a previous video. Some 16 million men and several 100,000 women served in the military during the war. Many teens lied about their age in order to enlist. The average American soldier or sailor in the Second World War, though, was 26 years of age, stood 5'8", and weighed about 144 pounds, an inch taller and 8 pounds heavier than the typical recruit in the First World War. Only 1 in 10 had attended college, and only 1 in 4 had graduated from high school. And this is a nice poster that urged American civilians to continue their relentless wartime production, which is going to win the war. Adolf Hitler had scoffed at the idea that the United States could produce 50,000 warplanes a year. America was nothing but beauty queens, millionaires, and Hollywoods. His ignorance of America's industrial potential proved fatal to Germany's war plans. By the end of 1942, U.S. war production had already exceeded the combined output of Germany, Japan, and Italy. And at an Allied planning conference in Iran in 1943, Joseph Stalin raised the glass to toast American production, without which this war would have been lost. And the War Production Board converted America's industrial output to war production. And in making the United States the great arsenal of democracy, the Roosevelt administration transformed the economy into the world's most efficient military machine. By 1945, the year the war ended, plants in the United States were running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they produced 300,000 warplanes, 89,000 tanks, 3 million machine guns, and 7 million rifles. Just an incredible amount of stuff. And how did they finance this war? With the Revenue Act, also called the Victory Tax, made most workers taxpayers. As you'll recall from a previous video, most Americans didn't pay any income tax because they didn't make enough money. But by the war's end, 90% of workers were paying income tax. And this covered about 45% of military costs from 1939 to 1946, and the government borrowed the rest, a little over half, 55%. And the nation's unemployment rate, as we mentioned, plummeted to full employment. In those years, anything under 3 or 4% is considered full employment. And economic controls were instituted by the Office of Price Administration. They set price ceilings. With prices frozen, basic goods had to be allocated through rationing, with coupons doled out for limited amounts of sugar, coffee, gasoline, and automobile tires and meats. And you could only get these things at certain times or on certain days. And there's your coupons. You got to take the one stamp out of your book to use it. And there's your ration book that you would receive. And what was the role of women in the war? The WAC! The Women's Army Corps had nearly 150,000 people in it during the Second World War. And women accepted for volunteer emergency services. The Waves was the Navy equivalent, and others joined the Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and the Army Air Force. And more than 6 million women entered the civilian workforce. And there's Rosie the Riveter at work on a Boeing B-17, the first series of bombers that were produced. And this created all kinds of opportunity for women to earn income during the Second World War. Jeanette Justice, my cousin's mother, was a riveter, and she's still alive. She's in her 90s. African Americans. 500,000 will leave the South for better opportunities during the war years, and more than 1 million blacks nationwide joined the industrial workforce for the first time. Lured by jobs and higher wages in new military-related plants and factories, African Americans from Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana headed west, where the dramatic expansion of defense-related jobs had significant effects on the region's population. During the war years, the number of African Americans rose sharply in western cities such as Seattle, Portland, and Los Angeles. And there's also racial tension during the Second World War. There was discrimination and race riots, and some black leaders fought back. In 1941, A. Philip Randolph, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, planned a march on Washington to demand an end to racial discrimination in defense industries. This is 2 decades before Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on Washington will actually take place. And to fend off the march, the Roosevelt administration struck a bargain. Randolph called off the demonstration in return for an executive order that required equal treatment in the hiring of defense plants workers, and there was some progress made on that. Throughout the war, African Americans noted the irony of the United States fighting against racism abroad while tolerating it at home. And in Detroit, growing racial tensions escalated into a full-fledged riot. And there's a picture of a man assaulting an African American, and the police let him do it. And in uniform, African Americans rushed to enlist after the Japanese attack, and they are forced, however, to serve in segregated military units. And that ends part 1.